As bold as lions. As bold as lions.
As bold as lions.
As bold as lions.
You're listening to the As Bold as Lions podcast.
Well, hello and welcome to the As Bold as Lions podcast. My name is Derek. Just so good to have you join me today, whether a first-time listener or a regular returning listener. And if you want to know a little bit more about me, you can check out my website, DerekCharlesJohnson.com. You can find some other things there, some resources as well. Just materials, if you're a believer in Christ, some things to help you just navigate life and equip you for the journey in faith. And if that's something that is completely new or foreign to you, or maybe you're just kind of checking out what Christianity, what this Jesus is all about, there's hopefully some good things there as well. And hey, I'd love to talk further and point you in the right direction with all of that. So we get all kinds of listeners, all kinds of folks from different walks of life across the globe. As stats kind of come in from month to month, and I can look and see where people are downloading and streaming podcasts from. It's literally everywhere, and it doesn't make sense to me because I don't know how these things go out and how they reach the places that they do, but it's really cool nevertheless. And we are in April already, and that to me is crazy as well. We're just flying through this year. Every year is like this, but for some reason I feel like I'm still just processing and the things like New Year's and Christmas, those big events that were kind of recent. At least they feel they were recent. Still just kind of like, okay, now we're in April, Easter's over, and just all these things moving ahead. Pretty soon, spring, hopefully spring. I think a lot of people are kind of just tired of winter, tired of cold, snow, whatever, wherever you're at, especially in the U.S., and you're just ready for the thaw and new life and everything that the summer brings. And I'm right there with you, because summer is probably summer or fall. Those are kind of my two favorite times of the year. And summer has its high points, which I think I always look forward to, especially after winter. So all that to be said, I'm always looking for some new ideas, some new content, just to spark things for what I blog about, what I write devotionals about, and what I bring over to the podcast and kind of talk and record through on here. And the blog has a way to kind of what I do there, which is a monthly thing, goes out if you're on my email list. Otherwise, it posts on my website and you can read it every month. But what I use from that, I often bring over and make a podcast out of as well, which is what we are doing today. This first blog that posted or is posting for the website. It's called Marching Around Jericho. And that's where I've kind of been as I've been reading through the Old Testament starting this year, and finally got through those first 5 books. If you've read the Old Testament, you know it's kind of like the beginning of the Bible with Genesis, and then goes into the Exodus story and Moses and just the Israelites and the law. And there's some heavy stuff in there. There's some stuff that you just kind of got to keep reading and get through, because it's just details that are kind of easy to kind of just push through and not get what we should out of that. And I'm guilty of that myself. But as you get through all of that and you get to the end of Moses's life, then you have this whole new era of the Israelite journey, which embarks with Joshua leading them. And I've just been kind of starting there recently and looking at the Battle of Jericho. And I think in the 7+ years of writing a blog and the couple years of doing a podcast, I've never looked at Jericho specifically. And I'm kind of going back through now and what part of the Bible have I talked about? What passages have we kind of discussed? What are some new areas that I've never talked about? And Jericho comes to mind as one of those ones that I've not done anything with. So kind of felt like it's low-hanging fruit to just be like, well, I'm reading through it anyway in my daily quiet times and devotions. So let's talk about it. Let's dig into it a little bit more. So just kind of moving into that as we march around Jericho today, we know if you know the Bible, if you know the Old Testament, there's a lot of backstory. I talked about that. The Israelites up to this point, they've been wandering in the desert for 40 years, taken out of Egypt, this, miraculous deliverance, Moses leading them, all the plagues with Pharaoh, everything, the Red Sea. But then in terms of actually going into and claiming the promised land, we know the story. It's in Numbers, the book of Numbers. Talks about how they sent these 12 spies and 2 came back with a good report and the other 10 are like, no way, we can't do this. So that disobedience factor of not taking the land is something that sets them back 40 years, where God basically says, I'm going to do a whole reset and just bring a new generation into my promised land, which, that's a whole sermon, blog, podcast in itself that and I think I have touched on that on some other occasions, but that being something that is huge to the story of Israel. And so the baton of leadership is being passed from Moses to Joshua. And the first step that the Israelites have to take from this point is literally a step into the Jordan River. And similar to what happened for their own forefathers with the Red Sea deliverance, where God parts the waters, kind of similar to that, where they have to step in and then the waters get pushed back. The Jordan River is at flood stage. It talks about this in the Bible. So it's overflowing its banks. It's a huge, mighty river and a point where they're going to go through, and you can't just kind of wade across it or swim. It's pretty treacherous. So God pushes back the river and the Israelites walk through on dry ground. And so all this is happening. They're moving in. They're coming into this land. And where before they had a fear of the giants and of what awaited them, I think some of that's diminishing a little bit. And the fear is now in the hearts of their enemies, as their enemies, the Canaanites, all these tribes that live, these people groups that live in this land. They're hearing about what God has done for them, what he's doing, how he's delivering, how he's bringing them through. And those stories are just starting to weigh on them. And Joshua sends some spies into Jericho, the town we're talking about today. And they encounter a prostitute by the name of Rahab. And you probably know the story. You're familiar with this. There's another whole sideline message that we could take with just on Rahab and how her bloodline gets grafted into being part of the Israelite story, even all the way through to David and to ultimately to Jesus. But these spies are harbored by Rahab, and they're kept safe from the authorities that know that, hey, there's been some guys that have come around and where are they? And she's hiding them. But listen to what Rahab tells these spies. This is in Joshua chapter 2, verses 9 through 11. This is very interesting as we think about the fear that the Israelite forefathers had, their generation that passed in the wilderness. They didn't make it. The fear that they have of these people that they were going to go into, how that has changed. She says, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the fear of you has fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land melt away before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the two kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you devoted to destruction. And as soon as we heard it, our hearts melted, and there was no spirit left in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in the heavens above and on the earth beneath. Rahab's being just completely, full disclosure, honest with these two spies from Israel, saying, hey, my people, the countries in this land that you guys are coming into, we are afraid. Our hearts are melting because we know that there's something different about you guys. There's something different about your God. And we know you're going to take this land. We see it. We see it coming. And the Lord is with them. These Canaanite nations, which Jericho is a part of, they're afraid. God has commissioned Israel to take the land and to drive out all the inhabitants. And so it's interesting because you think about just a few years before, that other generation, they were so afraid to go into this land. They were so afraid to fight and rise up and take what God was giving them. And then a whole generation later, they're going in, they're spying it out, and it's a completely different report as they're hearing from one on the inside, Rahab, who's saying, man, we know you guys are going to come in and just, you're going to clear everything out, and we're afraid. And so that's kind of where I'm setting this up today, because we're focusing on this battle for Jericho, this battle for this city. And I want to look at just the kind of the plan that God lays out before Joshua, before the Israelite nation, and then draw some applications that we can make for ourselves today. If we're true to follow God's will in the battle, I believe he promises to follow through and give us the victory. And what was true for ancient Israel can still apply to us today, that there's still truths that we can take from a story like this and use them, because they had to overcome fear. They had to overcome adversity. They had to be obedient, and then they had to keep fighting. Jericho was like the first stop of many to clear out this land. And it's a whole side discussion to talk about how, God allows a whole people groups to be wiped out. There's certainly untold evil within these cities. There's things that are just, even like today, there's things that are so dark that it's almost as if at some point God has to judge, God has to deal with that, because the level of how bad that has gotten, how wicked that has gotten has risen up to him, and it has to be dealt with. So that's where Israel's at as they're going into take these places, that the whole lot has to be taken out. And it's them going in and kind of fighting a holy war, if we think of it that way. So we're going to dive in. I've got 3 points for us as we look at the Battle of Jericho. I might be sipping on my tea here because I'm got a little bit of a scratchy throat, and I don't want to keep clearing my throat. I know that's no fun to listen to. But as we get started, just either have your Bible. You can either have your Bible kind of handy, as we're in the book of Joshua, kind of around chapter 6. Otherwise, just listen, and I'll try to reference everything so if you want to go back, you can find it. So, first point I have today is that God has a battle plan that we must stick to. A couple verses from the beginning of chapter 6. Now, Jericho was shut up inside and outside because of the people of Israel. None went out and none came in. So Israel's coming close and they're around, and this city is just on kind of a heightened lockdown. In verse 2 and 3 of that same chapter, the Lord said to Joshua, "See, I've given Jericho into your hand with its king and mighty men of valor. You shall march around the city, all the men of war going around the city once. thus shall you do for 6 days. So God's giving Joshua the blueprints for success. And he's very specific with details on how this is supposed to happen, what Israel's supposed to do each day. They're marching around the city walls one time, and then they're done. And that's for 6 days. Then on the seventh day, the instruction changes. In Joshua 6, 4, and 5, he says, on the seventh day you shall march around the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow the trumpets, and when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, when you hear the sound of the trumpet, then all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city will fall down flat, and the people shall go up, everyone straight before him. So the last day, the seventh day, is the culmination of the plan. And again, it's pretty specific here, although we don't really understand the details of like, if I'm in Israel, if I'm Joshua, I'm still thinking like, okay, 6 days we march around one time and we're done. Seventh day we march around 7 times. Then on the seventh, then we blow the trumpets and we put up a great shout, and then the walls found out. The walls are just going to fall. Okay. And so my thought is I'm still a little sketchy on the details of how that actually is going to happen, how this is going to take place. And some scholars, just kind of reading a little further on this, they think maybe an earthquake happened. The ram's horn blows, and at that same moment, there's a massive earthquake, and these walls crumble. Could be. Or it could be that God just did it. Like they're marching, they blow the horns, and God just, takes them out. But either way, this was how God prescribed the plan. These were the steps that he said you must take. And I just think when we bring a request to the Lord, maybe it's an area that we're seeking some victory in or some sort of response from him for. Are we quick to follow his plan as he prescribes something? We all have our Jerichos. We all have some place where we're looking for an answer. Maybe as you're listening to this, there's a physical need that you or somebody in your family has, something health related. Maybe there's something financial that you're dealing with, situation. Maybe there's a family relationship, a spousal relationship, some other type of relationship, friendship, something at work, something at school, probably something within any of those categories. And if we're praying to the Lord, if we're listening, we're going to come to realize that he's speaking. He's going to say something. I believe this. And maybe it's just through reading scripture, and we're hearing him respond with just, peace be still, or something that just, he gives us something to deal with the situation that we're in. Or maybe, through prayer, or there's a sermon that we hear, a message, and it's, maybe listening to a podcast like this, and you hear something, and it comes across as like, oh, okay, God, you wanted me to hear that. All right. Maybe it's just some wise counsel. Maybe you have a friend who's seasoned in the faith, or kind of a mentor relationship type of person who gives you just some words that you need to hear and then sort of act upon that. But as he's speaking, are we able to then say, okay, God, I get it. I hear the battle plan, and I understand what you're asking me to do, and I will do it. Are we able to say that? That's a huge thing. That's actually a pretty mature step as a believer, to be able to respond to the Lord and then to then go forth. And I think that's where the rubber meets the road in our faith. That's where our faith actually grows some legs and starts moving forward in those moments where we do respond with an affirmative to the Lord. So my first point, we must stick to the battle plan. The second thing I have is that God's battle plan doesn't always make sense. And this is Joshua 6, verse 10. He commanded the people, Joshua, you shall not shout or make your voice heard, neither shall any word go out of your mouth until the day I tell you to shout. then you shall shout. So everything being said in that first point, can I just take a step back for a minute and just kind of postulate this? This is the first major conquest of the land. They've spent this whole time wandering and kind of God weeding out the naysayers and everybody and getting them ready to go into the promised land and cross the Jordan River and all these things that kind of happen leading up to chapter 6 in Joshua. And this first real fight, this first real battle they're facing, this is probably one of the most fortified cities they're going to face. We know Jericho has these walls. It's just heavily armored and protected. And they go in with this battle plan that we just read about. And something doesn't add up. Something doesn't make sense here. That God is laying out this plan. It doesn't really sound like even a battle is going to take place. And beyond that, how awkward is it going to be for the Israelites? They're marching around the city. How absurd does this look to those in Jericho looking down at them? And I'm thinking of VeggieTales here for a minute, and I'm trying to block that out of my head. But how just ridiculous does this look to march around the city for 6 days and then leave and then do this on the 7th? And I'm thinking, man, the fear that these people in Jericho had for a minute, they're probably pulling back and being like, well, these guys don't look so tough after all. But sometimes the battle plan God gives us, it makes no sense. And I have to take you to other passages in Scripture to kind of support my point here. But there's things like the healing of Naaman's servant who had to go wash in the Jordan River. This is, I think Elijah. I don't want to say Elijah. I was looking at the thing, but I think it was Elijah. Tells him he's got to go wash. This is in 2 Kings 5, 7 times to be healed. Or how about the disciples fishing and they've not caught anything all night, and Jesus says, go out a little further and put your nets down in Luke 5. And they do it only because they're like, well, okay, Jesus said to do it, so we'll try it. Or Jesus in John chapter 9, where he takes mud and spit and he puts it on a man's eyes to heal this man. Just things that don't make any sense. And the only explanation I can come to with these and just the other stories in the Bible where we kind of left scratching our head at how things come together, the only thing I can come up with is that in all of these instances, it gives God the victory, the glory in all of it. The victory that happens, the healing, the positive end result, it's all done in such a way that he gets the glory, he gets the honor. See, I know myself too well. And if I can somehow take the credit a little bit to say, man, that was successful and I did pretty good there, give myself an attaboy and a pat on the back, I'll do it. But if God asks me to do something in a way that makes no sense, there's no way I'm going to be able to explain it as somehow being my idea, somehow being something that I made happen. The glory and the praise of it all goes back to him. And that's to where it belongs. So when the battle plan doesn't make sense, we must still stick with it because God knows what he's doing. So we have a battle plan that we must stick to that the Lord gives us. Sometimes we have to realize that it's not going to make a whole lot of sense. We still have to follow through on it. And the third thing I have today is that when we do this, when we follow God's battle plan, it's going to set us up for further victories. All the way to the end of Joshua. I kind of skipped ahead. I'm not there in my Bible reading yet, but I love how Joshua kind of has this, just like Moses does, is kind of this, farewell sort of message to the people of like, hey, we got there, we did it, but there's warnings, there's things I need to share with you. And just so that you're prepared, because you guys are going to take it from here. And in Joshua 23, verse 3, he says, and you have seen all that the Lord your God has done to all these nations for your sake, for it is the Lord your God who has fought for you. Joshua is saying, take a look at where we're at. God did all of this. He's fought for you. He's pushed all these other nations out. You know, you can go all the way back to Jericho and think about how he brought the victory there, and everything else that ensues was all him. Jericho was really the first of many victories for Israel. They had a setback after that, the setback of Ai. I think, I don't know if I'm saying that right, but it's the letter A and I. You can read about Achan's sin. That's in Joshua 7. But much of the rest of the book is just victory after victory for the Jewish nation. And then we have allotments and tribal disbursements that are being made, that everybody's getting kind of their piece of the pie of where they're going to settle. And the land that God had promised is finally theirs. This long story that begins with Abraham, it's finally come full circle. Yes, God was in the details. He was in the day-to-day. We can see that through this battle. But yet he guided from generation to generation over the course of several hundred years, knowing that his people would see the victory if they would trust in him. More conquests would follow, even as Israel is in the land. They've got enemies that would be from without, along their borders, and enemies right within. And if the people would choose to follow the Lord, they would be blessed. But if not, curses would come. And as I study Jericho and then the rest of their taking of the land, the conquering of the land, I see a God who is looking for that same warrior spirit, put that in quotes, warrior spirit, that indwelt the likes of Caleb and Joshua, men of true valor in the Lord, that rose up and led and helped to bring about this conquering of the land. And there's this phrase that I'm kind of sort of just stumbled upon. I don't know if the Lord just kind of led me to this or if I picked it up somewhere along the line from somewhere, but it's just this, is this confidence in the Lord begets more confidence. And I want to be quick to say, preface it with in the Lord, confidence in the Lord. Because confidence in myself has nowhere to go. There's nowhere to go. But some sort of holy confidence, some sort of divine confidence in who he is, knowing God can and will give the victory. That's the kind of assurance I need, and that's what I'm after as I'm going through the daily battles that I face. That is, you're going through the battles that you face. Do you have that sort of holy confidence, unshakable confidence to know that whatever I'm facing today, God's with me and he can handle this? When I see him answer some sort of prayer that I thought, man, that was pretty big, that was pretty bold, it emboldens me to ask for something that's even bigger, that's even bolder than that. And then I start just realizing, well, what's really too big for my God to do? If he wills it, he will do it. And I think we're kind of in that place as Christians with the crossroads of the faith of many, where we're seeing the culture going just in the steep decline, and we're trying to hold back as much as we can, and sometimes just saying we got to play it safe because these are days where we can't be too crazy, we can't be too zealous, we can't stir the boat too much. And I just say, where in Scripture where do we get any reference that somehow worked for anybody that did that? That we have to keep pushing forward. We have to keep going after the land. We have to keep taking the Jerichos down. Really, it's just getting over that fear. And really that fear is just our own, trusting in ourselves. What can I do? If I can't make that happen, I better not do it. Well, we're not the ones ultimately that make it happen. It's God that does it. If we look at the battle plan of Jericho, there's nothing that Israel really did besides marching and blowing some trumpets that caused those walls to fall down. They were obedient, but God made it happen. So guys, I don't know the Jericho that you're that you're facing today. I do know you're probably somebody that has been looking at it and sizing it up for a while, checking out the condition of those walls. Man, they seem pretty thick. They seem pretty big. Maybe there's a weak spot somewhere where you can just kind of sneak through and get past. Or maybe you've caught a glimpse of all this and you've said, man, there's no way, it's too big. That financial need is too big. That healing need is too much to ask for. To ever see that relationships restored just seems impossible. There's never going to be reconciliation. It's just too hard. Go on further down the list, whatever it is. Fear has the ability to keep us from moving forward and seeing what more that God might have. It really just stops us dead in our tracks, and it paralyzes our faith. Guys, for those who regularly read or listen to anything I put out under this As Bold as Lions heading, you know I'm unwilling to accept fear as the final word for anything, because I'm not being as bold as a lion if I do, and you aren't either. If we run, if we avoid Jericho altogether, if we reject the battle plan because we don't want to follow it, it's confusing, it seems strange, whatever, we miss out on what God has in store. We miss out on his best for us. I truly believe that. And I don't want you to miss out. I don't want you to not see the promise that he has on the other side of your Jericho. I don't want you to be held captive by the situation that you're in and what you're facing. So I plead with you to give it over to the Lord, to hear his heart. And then as he starts laying some action steps before you, as he starts unveiling, here's what the battle plan is, you're simply obedient to say, yes, Lord. Even when it doesn't make sense. Even when you're like, God, what is that even going to accomplish if I do that? There's so many times where it's just like, he's not after, he's using our hearts in the process to develop those. But he's also saying, so that the glory goes to one place alone, I want you to follow this plan. And that's a good thing. God's not up there being like this glory hog that says, you got to do it my way because that's the only way it's going to happen, because I just love to get all the credit for things. God's saying, no, this is ultimately for your good. It's for my glory. And it's going to bring you into a better place. That's what happened for Israel as they followed his commands, as they got it right to take the promised land. And I believe he has that in store for so many of us if we'll follow him. As I do so often, I just want to share my email address, info@DerrickCharlesJohnson.com. I'm also on Facebook, places like that, Instagram. So once in a while I'll get messages through those sites, but I'd love to chat further. If you're just struggling with something, if you're wrestling with something, maybe even just the thought of becoming a Christian and what that means, I'd love to help to just kind of point you in the right direction. And maybe I don't have the answer you're looking for, but I can point you to a source that'll help you get closer to it. Guys, I love you. I love walking the journey with you. I love fighting this fight of the faith, knowing that some days the battle plan doesn't make sense, but ultimately God is at work and he's bringing Jericho walls down all around us. And that's something to even testify and say, hey, give praise to the Lord because he's done this amazing thing. And we should be sharing that. We should be, in our meetings, in our gatherings, churches, and small groups and everything that we get together with other Christians, we should be encouraging one another to say, look at what the Lord's done. This is amazing. I want to leave you with Ephesians 5:15-17, our theme verse for the As Bold as Lions podcast. It says, be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is. Guys, take care. Continue to march around Jericho. Let's see those walls crumble, and let's give the Lord all the praise for it. God bless. Hey guys, this is Derek Charles Johnson. You have been listening to the As Bold as Lions podcast. I am a blogger, a songwriter, an artist. And if you've been encouraged by this podcast, please go ahead and subscribe and share, and head over to DerekCharlesJohnson.com for more encouraging content. God bless.